right, I'm going to get us started here. We're running a little bit late. We've had some technical difficulties, but thank you all for being patient and being out tonight. I'm Reg Hoyt. I'm co-chair of the Animal Biotechnology and Conservation Department. And this event this evening is another one of our One Health seminars. This is our 5th this semester so far. And so for most of you, I think pretty much everybody knows what One Health is. But for those who maybe haven't been here for others, One Health is a way of really looking at problem solving in the world. It came out of more of looking at the fact that the health of environment impacts the health of animals, whether those are wild animals or domestic animals, and in turn the health of the environment or the health of other animals impacts humans. Well, we've taken this to a totally different level. We are looking at this as being an initiative that is multidisciplinary in scope. It's a systems approach, and that we're kind of looking at the well-being of all of these elements of the triad are interconnected with each other. Our hope is that every single major on the campus at Del Val will embrace the concept of One Health from the standpoint of approaching problems from a multidisciplinary approach. For the older people, I won't say older, let's say mature, well, maybe not mature either, but for people who have been around a while, in your lives, I'd guarantee that you found that problems are not a single discipline, that problems involve multiple disciplines. And in my field, conservation, if I don't understand something about economics, or I don't understand something about sociology, or I don't understand something about agriculture and other uses of resources, I'm lost. And so either I have to have partners or I have to start from a multidisciplinary approach. So all of our One Health is kind of coming at this from, yeah, we've got all kinds of different problems that we're addressing. There's all kinds of issues out there. But if you think about it, they're all One Health issues. And so the mantra is, if you don't know the answer to the question, what is it? One Health, absolutely. So tonight we're very lucky to have Peter Pringle here, and David Wade has played an amazing part in bringing Peter to us tonight, and so I'm going to turn this over to him and allow him to do the introductions. Thank you so much for being here.
Testing. Oh, good evening. My name is David Wade, and I'm a 1974 graduate of the Delaware Valley College of Science and Agriculture, which we abbreviated as DVC. And like the National Agricultural College, DVC was a predecessor to Delaware Valley University. I want to thank the DVU faculty and administration, particularly Professor Hoyt, for providing the opportunity to hold this event. I also want to thank our speaker, Peter Pringle, author of Experiment 11, which I found to be an amazing book, for agreeing to visit DVU and share some insights into the discovery of streptomycin, the first drug effective against tuberculosis, and the resulting Nobel Prize controversy involving a faculty member of the National Agricultural College. So this is entitled Experiment 11, Dark Secrets in the Discovery of a Wonder Drug. I'll give a brief summary of the presentation, which is on the flyer that's you've already seen probably. And I'd like to say a few words about why this was of interest to me and its relevance to the students here before I introduce Peter. So in 1943, Albert Schatz, a young PhD student at Rutgers Agricultural College in New Jersey, was working on a wartime project testing bacteria from farmyard soil when he discovered streptomycin, a new antibiotic and the first effective drug against tuberculosis. TB had killed 2 billion people in the previous 2 centuries. Schatz's professor, Selman Waksman, claimed credit for the discovery, calling Schatz a mere lab bench worker, and secretly enriched himself with royalties from the patent filed by Merck, a pharmaceutical company. Young Schatz fought back, and the result was one of the most vicious battles for credit of a major discovery in the history of science. Schatz won the title of co-discoverer and a share of the royalties, but in 1952, Waksman alone was awarded the Nobel Prize. Schatz was a researcher for 2 years at the National Agricultural College, now Delaware Valley University, and then he disappeared into academic obscurity. The gripping, scandalous narrative unfolds on the tiny Rutgers campus, but the repercussions spread worldwide, including this campus. The streptomycin patent was a breakthrough for the drug companies, overturning patent limits on products of nature and paving the way for today's big pharma. Experiment 11 is a classic study of the researchers in science who do the hard work but never reap the glory. The story, 75 years later, is just as relevant now as it was then due to the current phenomenon of antibiotic resistance among microorganisms and also the apparently insatiable desire of lab directors for adulation. There are many elements of this story that have an indirect connection to my life, including my time as a student at DVC. I was born and raised in and near New Brunswick, less than a mile from Rutgers University, New Brunswick campus, and 2 miles from Rutgers Piscataway campus. The streptomycin discovery had been made 8 years prior to my birth, and I was just an infant when the Nobel Prize controversy was occurring. As a teenager, I had a part-time job working in a building on the Rutgers New Brunswick campus, which, although unknown to me at the time, was just adjacent to Martin Hall, where Waksman's lab had been located and where Schatz's discovery had been made. Also, I eventually had the opportunity to spend a postdoctoral year working at the Waksman Institute of Microbiology on the Rutgers Piscataway campus in the lab of Professor Carl Schaffner, and Schaffner had been a postdoc with Professor Waksman. While I was at DVC, I was a biology major, and I took a histology course with Professor Lionel Adelson, who was then head of DVC's science division. Unknown to me at the time, Adelson had joined the National Agricultural College about 2 years after the Nobel Prize controversy had occurred and had been a research associate of Dr. Albert Schatz, discoverer of streptomycin. He was co-author with Schatz on 3 of the 13 publications produced by Schatz while Schatz was at the National Agricultural College. Schatz's former mentor, Selman Waksman, died just before I started my senior year at DVC. One of the villains of this story, Dr. Albert Sabin, the developer of the oral polio vaccine, was an honorary degree recipient at my PhD graduation ceremonies. So since graduating from, obtaining the PhD from the University of Medicine Dentistry of New Jersey, now part of Rutgers University, I've had numerous postdoctoral experiences with people and institutions associated with the Nobel Prizes, including work with the Nobel laureate in chemistry and almost 4 years of work at Sweden's Karolinska Institute, home of the Nobel Prize in Medicine. While at Karolinska, I had the opportunity to work with then chairman of the Nobel Committee for the Medicine Prize, and I also attended 3 Nobel Prize award ceremonies. Nobel Prizes have existed since 1901 and are still considered to be the most important of science prizes. They are a very big deal. When you read Experiment 11, I hope you will also look at the Nobel Prize website and the 1952 Nobel Prize in Medicine webpage. Read both the prize announcement citation to Waksman, which was made in October of 1952, and the award ceremony address given 7 weeks later in December of 1952. The difference between the two is striking and was due in part to the efforts of the National Agricultural College administration. Finally, I am now gaining an appreciation of why Alfred Nobel created a Prize in Literature. Without the work of Peter Pringle, I would still be oblivious to the story described in Experiment 11 and its connection to DVU's predecessor. Peter Pringle is an author and journalist. He holds undergraduate and graduate degrees from Oxford University, world-famous institution. He is a fellow of the Linnaean Society of London. He's a veteran British foreign correspondent and the author and co-author of several nonfiction books, including the bestseller Those Are Real Bullets, the New York Times Notable Food Incorporated, and most recently Experiment 11, the dark story behind the discovery of streptomycin, the first cure for tuberculosis. He was on the staff of the London Sunday Times, the Observer, and the Independent, and covered Africa, the Middle East, the United States, and the former Soviet Union. That must have been extremely interesting. He has written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, Atlantic, the New Republic, and The Nation. He has written one thriller, Day of the Dandelion, and is now writing a second with the same protagonist, Hair of the Cat, about the 2018 Salisbury poisoning of a former Soviet double agent. I'm sure everyone's familiar with that story. Also, he has written The Murder of Nikolai Vavilov, and DVU's Professor Doyle, I think her name is pronounced, is trying to get him to speak to her genetics class about that book. Peter Pringle lives in New York City. So, having said all of that, I want to now introduce Peter, and thank you for your attention.
This or with that,
Okay,
right?
and this is how to change it.
Yep.
How do you do that?
So forward. That turns it up, and this is the point.
Oh, okay. Great. Well, I don't know, David's really said it all. Thank you very much, David. I'll try and add bits of interest here and there, but I want to thank Reg Hoyt, first of all, for allowing me inside the door of his One Health seminar, and special thanks to David for that there might be a connection between Albert Schatz and here. So, first off, some of you must be wondering what on earth a British foreign correspondent is doing talking about streptomycin to you. Having covered wars and battlefronts and things like that, I'm old enough now to do something else. Reg is coming to stop this happening. What?
I think this will work better for you.
This will work.
That was the still.
It's a dangerous place. Try that. Let's see how that works. I mean, I've been to war fronts, but this is ridiculous. How's that? Is that better? Okay. So, first of all, what am I doing here? Might be a good idea to start. And where is the missing link between being a foreign correspondent and getting interested in this? Well, in my journalism days, I've always tried to follow Margaret Mead's somewhat stern admonition that the only thing worth doing is to add to the sum of accurate information in the world. And there was a picture of Margaret Mead, but that's not it. And then, so anyway, how come I'm possibly qualified or not to say anything about this science? Well, I did originally geology, and I was mad about fossils. And so I became a paleontologist for about 6 months. And we drove all the way out to Tehran in a Land Rover from London in 1963, and looking for these things, ammonites, which you I'm sure know about, recognize. They're wonderful creatures, and they lived about 175 million years ago, give or take 10 million. And they're lots of fun. And what we tried to do, what did you say again, Reg? Oh yeah, go like that. Oh no, that's back. That's even further back. There we are. So this, nothing to do with streptomycin, not yet. This is the Jurassic Sea, as it covered, hello, back again. This is the pointer, right? There you go, yeah. Somewhere around there is England, what used to be 75 million years ago. And what we wanted to know was if the sea that covered southern England and northern France and Europe extended all the way to Tehran and Iran. Well, you might not think this is a particularly important project, but it was a project. It kept me out of trouble for a while. And the way that you tell the difference between one ammonite and another, is these little, they have these little striations on the top here. And so, you know, it's a kind of science project. Anyway, when it was all over, I was much more interested in the Middle East than I was in geology, ammonites. So I stayed out there. But we had discovered something. We did actually say, we could actually now say, yes, that sea went that far. All right, now to streptomycin. So it was discovered 76 years ago in the basement laboratory, which David mentioned, at Rutgers. It was the first effective drug against tuberculosis, a disease that indeed had killed 2 billion people in 200 years. The discovery led to the end of numerous TB sanatoria around the world and relief from suffering for millions. But the discovery also resulted in one of the most vicious battles for credit of a major find in the history of science, and included a bitter legal fight and a disputed Nobel Prize. So the battle pitted Professor Selman Watson, head of the microbiology department at Rutgers, and his graduate student Albert Schatz. And today the controversy continues with opposing sides supporting either Professor Waxman or Albert Schatz, both of whom are dead. So here are the two scientists in their Tell me your days, there they are. And you can see they seem to be having a nice time, they're perfectly civil to each other, but wait for it. And now, of course, disputed discoveries, just a little digression here, not exactly rare in the history of science. So let's take another brief diversion and look at the more famous ones. Yeah, there he is. Pythagoras. Well, we still ponder over who first came up with the theorem. Was it Pythagoras or the Babylonians, the Chinese or the Indians? Had they figured it out centuries before? Still a discussion. Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz. Did Isaac Newton figure out calculus, or was it Gottfried Leibniz? Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. Was Darwin the first to come up with the idea of evolution, or was it his fellow Englishman, Alfred Russel Wallace? Radio. Did the Italian Marconi invent radio, or was it Nikola Tesla? Or was it the Russian Alexander Popov? Confusion still reigns to such an extent over some of these discoveries that there is even a modern law known as Stigler's Law, which states boldly no scientific discovery is named after its original discovery. Amusingly, Stigler's law even actually applies to its author, Stephen Stigler. He was not the person who came up with the law. That was a professor of statistics at the University of Chicago, the American sociologist Robert Merton. He used such notable concepts as unintended consequences and self-fulfilling prophecies. So they, like the rest of us, are prey to human failings, greed, dishonesty, vanity. Such failings were noted by Ian Beveridge, the Australian-born animal pathologist, who became the director of the Institute of Animal Pathology at Cambridge in England, who wrote a marvelous book in the 1950s called The Art of Scientific Investigation, and I recommend it to you for all of you, and there he is, really nice looking man. Complete honesty is, of course, imperative in scientific work, he then wrote. Today, deception and misconduct in scientific research is on the rise. We hear about plagiarism, fake data, and altered images. We're often told this behavior results from systemic problems of the job, pressures of public or perish that the modern scientist experiences. Another excuse is that in the internet age, journal papers are scrutinized by more readers and inevitably more mistakes, deliberate or otherwise, are found. So now we return to streptomycin. In that case, we are not talking about mistakes. We are talking about deliberate distortion by a professor about the work of his student. And this was done under the rules of academic etiquette for the day, rules which said the lab director takes the laurels. In the history of science, claims of rank were not only common but accepted, especially in European science. The professor was a godlike figure. As a result of myths were created about credit, who had actually done what. Sometimes credit was wrongly applied by nothing more than droit de seigneur. The professor's name always came first on the journal paper publishing experiments, and no student had the audacity to challenge the professor. Researchers were lucky to be mentioned in the footnote as a part of the team. The discovery of streptomycin, however, was very different. The dramatic and moving story begins at the start of the Second World War. The hunt was on for new antibiotics that cure diseases of war, the massive bacterial infections in battle wounds, and the epidemics that arise in crowded and devastated cities. Diseases such as typhoid, cholera, and tuberculosis. The first antibiotic, penicillin, discovered by Alexander Fleming in 1928, was rushed into production in a joint wartime project by the British and the Americans. The project was so successful that by the time of the D-Day invasion of Normandy, there was enough penicillin to treat the entire Allied invasion force. Pretty good thing. Right? But penicillin will only cure some bacterial infections. No antibiotic had yet been discovered for the other tougher bacteria, the ones that cause typhoid and cholera, the deadly disease tularemia, spread by rabbits, and the most deadly killer of all, TB. Antibiotics, as you all know, are chemical compounds excreted by bacteria or fungi. Fleming discovered penicillin by accident in his London lab when spores of the fungus penicillin landed in a petri dish where he was growing staphylococcus, commonly known staph, that causes pus in open wounds. Before World War II, scientists in Russia and Europe had noted that one of the most prolific producers of these chemicals appeared to be a group of bacteria called the actinomycetes, thread-like strands of cells, and one of the world's experts on this group was Selman Waxman at Rutgers. And here he is. Waxman was a Russian Jew who fled Tsarist Russia in 1910, took his first degree at Rutgers, a PhD in California at Berkeley on enzymes produced by bacteria. By World War II, he had risen in the Rutgers ranks to become the head of the new Department of Microbiology at Rutgers. Most of his research was on the effect of bacteria on the soil, how they broke down the minerals to form humus. But the war had brought new priorities, a frantic search for antibiotics. Waxman's small band of researchers soon started finding a handful of antibiotics from microbes in the farmyard soil right outside his laboratory. The process of discovery was simple enough. Silly simple, one of the students called it. You fill a petri dish with moist soil, drop drop some known harmful bacteria in the soil, and wait for the telltale clear zones to appear. Under the right conditions, these bacteria produced antibiotics that killed the germs that cause infections. But they also destroyed human cells and were too toxic for general use. In 1942, one of Waxman's graduate students, also of Jewish descent, Albert Schatz, his grandfather had come to America in 1899. His family had run a dirt farm in Connecticut. And during the Depression, his father became a house painter. Born in 1920, Schatz studied at Rutgers, planning to be a farmer. Graduating in 1942, Waxman took him on as a PhD student, and he joined a small band of other graduates searching for antibiotics. After 4 months, Schatz was drafted into the Army Air Corps as a biologist in a lab in a military hospital in Miami. His service was cut short when he hurt his back and was declared unfit. He returned to Rutgers and Waxman's lab in June 1943. They were jolly times by all accounts, everyone pulling together in wartime towards a common purpose: find a new antibiotic that would help win the war. Waxman's students were devoted to their professor. They called him often their great white father. In Albert Schatz's absence from Rutgers, no new antibiotics had been found, but Schatz, then 23, was a persistent researcher, motivated by his hospital experience, watching soldiers die of infections for which he knew there was no cure. His goal, to find an antibiotic that would cure the greatest killer of them all, TB. He had a small stipend of $40 a month, lived in a makeshift room off the campus greenhouse, and worked day and night alone in the basement lab. By all accounts, Schatz had a bee in his bonnet about finding a new antibiotic. He was what Einstein called a true devotee of research, working all hours of the day and night. And with remarkable good luck, within 3 months, he found a candidate microbe. It seemed to kill bacteria penicillin would not touch. But what Schatz could not know without further experiments was whether the antibiotic would also be toxic in animals and in humans. In January 1944, Schatz wrote up his initial results for a science journal. Waxman added his own expertise to the article and generously put Albert Schatz's name first, Betty Bougie, a woman worker in the lab, and the second, and his own last, an acknowledgement that the moment of discovery belonged to Albert Schatz. Then Schatz started to test streptomycin against the human TB microbe, an experiment so risky of infection that Waxman and the other researchers in the group did not go near the laboratory where Schatz was doing the test. Schatz's test tube experiments demonstrated that streptomycin was indeed effective against the TB bacterium, and the next move was to test it on animals. At the time, the most important lab in the United States testing medicines was against TB in guinea pigs was at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester in Minnesota. Two leading researchers were William Feldman and Corwin Henshaw. They asked Waxman for a sample of streptomycin, and Schatz labored day and night extracting enough of the antibiotic for tests on 6 guinea pigs infected with TB. Within a few weeks, overjoyed, Feldman and Henshaw discovered that streptomycin worked. Here they are, Feldman and Henshaw. By the end of the summer of 1944, it was clear that streptomycin was indeed the first effective cure against TB, and Merck, a pharmaceutical company just down the tracks from Rutgers, set up production facilities. Waxman and Schatz signed a patent. Signed a patent application, swearing on oath that they were the co-discoverers. Bougie, at this point, was left out. More about that later. Waxman told Schatz that the patent would be owned by Merck, and that Merck would have the exclusive rights to manufacture streptomycin, and that neither of them would profit from the patent. But things changed dramatically. Waxman was then 57, towards the end of his career, and although he had established himself as a leader in his chosen field of microbiology and an expert in the actinomycetes, he had not achieved the fame and the fortune he desired. The archive papers at Rutgers and at the Library of Congress demonstrate, sometimes very bluntly, that he was determined to become known as the sole discoverer of streptomycin, and then he could be considered for a Nobel Prize. After all, Alexander Fleming, Howard Florey, and Ernest Chain had received the 1945 Prize for Medicine for the discovery of penicillin. Why not one for streptomycin? Waxman also sought a share of the royalties, so he began to exclude Schatz from contact with reporters who came to Rutgers to write stories about the new miracle cure. Waxman even confided in another researcher that he had done so deliberately because he said Schatz was immature and unable to handle the glare of the spotlight. At the same time, Waxman began to tell a version of the discovery that questioned part of Schatz's work. In his basement lab, Schatz had isolated 2 strains of actinomycetes that produced the antibiotic. Waxman now suggested that he, Waxman, had somehow been directly involved in the isolation of the second strain. That was not true. Documents in the archive make it clear that Waxman wanted Schatz out of the way. Waxman arranged, without Schatz's knowledge, for the patent to be transferred from Merck to Rutgers, and the university was very happy to receive it, with the prospect of millions of dollars from the royalties. Rutgers set up a special foundation to administer the patent and put Waxman in charge, and agreed to pay him 20% of the royalties, again without telling Schatz. But as Schatz was technically co-discoverer according to the patent, Waxman had to get Schatz to sign over his patent rights to Rutgers. One day, according to Schatz, Waxman called him into his office and asked him to sign the papers transferring the patent. Waxman told him that neither of them would profit from the transfer. The money from the royalties would go directly to Rutgers. That was also not true. The royalties soon started flowing because of the urgent wartime demand for streptomycin, tens of thousands of dollars a year going into Waxman's bank account when his salary was only $10,000. As he got richer, however, Waxman seems to have had pangs of guilt. Schatz had left Rutgers and was pursuing a research career in microbiology. Waxman started sending him $500 checks, a total of $1,500 in all, to Schatz from his personal bank account. First, Schatz was embarrassed and rejected them, but relented when Waxman insisted. Schatzman's wife, Vivian, was expecting their first child. He was earning little more than $100 a month on his GI Bill payments. Schatz had always thought that the $500 checks were from Waxman's personal bank account, gifts, in other words. Waxman asked him to pay taxes on the money, as though he had earned it. Schatz wondered where was the money really coming from. He had always trusted Waxman. He had a father and son relationship. He had to know the truth about the money. He wrote Waxman an anguished 7-page letter begging him for an explanation. Instead of owning up to his deception, telling Schatz the truth about his arrangement with Rutgers to receive 20% of the royalties, Waxman turned on his former student. He accused him of grandstanding his own contribution to the lab research. He said Schatz was merely a pair of hands at the lab bench. He had no right to any more recognition than he had already been given, that anything that Rutgers had done or was doing in terms of the patent was none of his concern. Schatz pursued his quest to find out more. The next letter, Waxman said, he would receive would be from the Rutgers lawyers. Schatz reported the contents of Waxman's letter to his family, and his Uncle Joe, who was a dentist, suggested that his nephew get a lawyer and fight for the recognition that he deserved. Schatz was reluctant. He couldn't afford the legal fees. But Uncle Joe knew a New Jersey lawyer who took the case on a contingency fee Schatz would only pay if he won. The lawyer was sharp and street smart, and forced reluctant Waxman to testify in pre-trial depositions, and quickly discovered how much Waxman had been getting from the royalties, $350,000 to date. The lawyer leaked the sum to the newspapers, and in short order, Rutgers settled the case. Schatz was given a lump sum of $125,000, of which the lawyer took 40%, and in addition, he was given a 3% share in the royalties. It would amount to about $12,000 a year for the life of the patent, 16 years. A tidy sum for an essentially penniless researcher. 13 others, including 2 women, Elizabeth Bougie and Christine Riley, who had worked in Waxman's lab, would share in the royalties, from 2 to 0.01%. But even more important to Schatz, the court recognized him as the legal co-discoverer of streptomycin. The scientific elite was appalled. They disapproved of Schatz's audacity to sue his professor. They branded him a money grubber and a spoiled brat. In their eyes, he was extremely lucky to have worked under such a fine professor, and he should have known better than to challenge his master. Schatz had difficulty finding a job in the chosen field of microbe research. He was obviously not an easy colleague. He bounced between jobs. At one of those, he spent 2 years here at the then National Agricultural College. He was restless and clearly found it hard to find a research project that would keep him at an elevated level. Waxman surely thought he had not hear again from Schatz, and he pursued his next goal, the Nobel Prize. He had been nominated for the discovery each year since 1946. With his income from the royalties, he traveled to Europe and Japan, setting up Waxman's foundations to promote streptomycin and his discovery of it. And this is Waxman with TB Kids in Italy on one of his European tours. He cultivated friends at the Nobel Committee in Stockholm, and it all paid off handsomely. The Nobel Committee decided to award it to Waxman alone for the discovery of streptomycin. When asked by the committee for his view of Schatz's contribution, Waxman dismissed Schatz's lab work, suggesting that Schatz was not worthy of a prize because he had made no independent discovery, and he knew very little about the problem to which he was assigned. The Nobel Committee accepted Waxman's explanation. On October the 23rd, 1952, the Nobel Committee announced that the year's winner of the Nobel Prize for Medicine was Selman Abraham Waxman, now aged 64, a rich scientist, now became a famous one. The Nobel citation was unequivocal. It was for the discovery of streptomycin. Schatz heard about the prize when he was working right here in his tiny research lab at the then National Agricultural College. The then president of the college, Elmer Reinthaler, complained in a letter to the Nobel Committee. It was Schatz, not Waxman, who had discovered streptomycin, he said, adding documentation from the lawsuit. But the Nobel Committee said once an award had been announced, it could not be changed. They regretted that the legal part of the information contained in Reinthaler's letter could not be used because it had not been published in a scientific journal. Schatz tried to muster support from his colleagues, but only a few were willing to go up against Professor Waxman, and the scientific elite supported their most recent laureate. At the award ceremony, the Nobel Committee acknowledged Schatz's contribution by including him in the preamble, and by rewording the citation to Waxman, saying the prize was not given for the discovery per se, but it was for Waxman's ingenious, systematic, and successful studies that have led to the discovery. Waxman, in his 6,113-word acceptance lecture, did not mention Albert Schatz, listing him only in an appendix, number 12 out of 19 other Waxman researchers, half of whom had not been at Rutgers when Schatz had discovered streptomycin. It is also important to note that Waxman did not mention several women researchers who had made contributions. They included Elizabeth Bougie, who had been on the first patent application, and Doris Jones, who was working on chicken viruses and had given a plate containing one of the streptomycin-producing strains to Schatz. Waxman's legal team said that Schatz had behaved like a dog yapping at the heels of a great world figure. Of course, this was not the first time the Nobel Committee had come under fire for its selection of a winner. A decade or so ago, Scientific American looked back at what it called the top 10 Nobel snubs. On the list was Dmitry Mendeleev, who missed out on an early Nobel Prize at the beginning of the last century for his influence on modern chemistry, and in particular for the periodic table. Charles Best, for his part as the student researcher in the discovery of insulin in 1922. The prize went to Frederick Banting and the administrator of the lab. Lisa Meitner, left out of the 1944 Nobel Prize for Chemistry, the discovery of nuclear fission. The prize went to Otto Hahn. In the 1950s, Rosalind Franklin never received the prize for her work on the structure of DNA. The 1974 prize for physics, specifically for the discovery of pulsars, was widely criticized, excluding the astronomer Jocelyn Bell Burnell. And the top list finally included the snubbed Albert Schatz. After his Nobel Prize, Waxman went from strength to strength, winning more accolades, his place in American history. When the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. wanted to set up an exhibition of antibiotics, they asked Waxman to send some artifacts of the original discovery, plus the page of his lab notebook describing the experiment. This was very difficult because he hadn't done it. He sent some lab equipment and a page he copied from his own notebook. He did not use Albert Schatz's notebook. The exhibition at the National Museum of American History never mentioned Schatz. Schatz did not know anything about the Smithsonian exhibition until after Waxman's death in 1973 at the age of 85. Then, Schatz's fortunes suddenly changed. In 1989, an English microbiologist named Milton Wainwright of the University of Sheffield became interested in the history of streptomycin. He came to America, interviewed Schatz, and wrote up his story in a British Science journal. Emboldened by this recognition, Schatz wrote to the Smithsonian asking for his name to be included in the exhibition, but they did not reply. Then in 1992, he saw a copy of the Smithsonian magazine that included an article about a resurgence of TB in America. Again, the article mentioned only Waxman describing the discovery of streptomycin. Schatz complained again. 4 years later, in 1996, Smithsonian invited Schatz to send evidence of his discovery. He sent the scientific papers announcing it and the 2 test tubes. One contained the strain of actinomycetes he had used, and the second a sample of the first isolate of the drug. The museum's exhibition was reorganized, and for the first time in an American academic institution, the caption under Schatz's photo told the simple truth. Dr. Albert Schatz discovered streptomycin in 1943 when he was a 23-year-old graduate student working for Dr. Waxman at Rutgers University. Before Schatz died, Rutgers, which had always vigorously supported Waxman, recognized Schatz for his contribution by awarding him the university's highest honor, the Rutgers Medal. All this time, one crucial piece of evidence was missing: Schatz's laboratory notebooks. They had been used in evidence in the 1950 lawsuit and had not been seen since. They were prima facie evidence. Either they showed Schatz had made the discovery, or they did not. When I started asking around at Rutgers in the obvious places, the archives and the libraries, no one had seen them. Then Doug Evely, a professor of microbiology at Rutgers, who had taken a keen interest in the case, asked the staff to take another look. An archivist, Erica Gorda, who works with the special collection at the Alexandra Library, had noticed a cardboard box marked only with the letter W that had been on the shelf next to Waxman's papers since the papers were donated some 20 years earlier. Opening the box for the first time, she found Schatz's notebooks. And on page 32, in his meticulous cursive, Schatz had entered the date, August the 23rd, 1943, the start of his experiment 11 on his actinomycet bacteria. This was the experiment that would produce streptomycin. The case was closed, for me at least. In Margaret Mead's terms, I had found the accurate information I sought. Why no one had looked for the notebooks before, why they had been quote-unquote lost, were not identified when Waxman papers were archived, were not sent to the Smithsonian, were not included when the Waxman Museum at Rutgers was set up. What motivated Waxman to send a copy of his own notebook and not Schatz's to the Smithsonian? All this will be debated for years to come, no doubt. So how does this advance the cause of scientific investigation? Does any of this matter today? Today, the Nobel Committee has an almost impossible task. They have to choose the discovery that everyone thinks deserves the prize, and then, according to the will of Alfred Nobel, they have to award it to, at the most, 3 people. In a world that today is so interconnected and in sciences like biology, where discoveries are often so complex and so dependent on the work of many more people than 3, the Nobel Committee is almost bound to be criticized for leaving someone out. But changes in the award are possible. Once they have chosen the discovery, why not recognize all those involved? Why leave out the researchers who do the grunt work? Is this fair? Is this honest? Should we be concerned? I think we should. The Nobel Prize is the ultimate accolade in science, among the scientific elite and also in the popular mind. It separates the receivers of the world of the award from all the scientists like no other prize. It creates role models. In the streptomycin discovery, the Nobel Committee did not feel it necessary to look at all the evidence that pointed to who deserved the credit, even though there was plenty of it, especially in the lawsuit. They only looked at the scientific papers. And finally, in this case, the Nobel Committee viewed Schatz as a grunt on the workbench. Literally, a med-betati, literally without work. Try that again. Med-abete. He was not a collega, a colleague of equal standing to Waxman. Peter Lawrence, my friend at the Cambridge Medical Research Lab, wrote that research students are like boosters on space rockets. They accelerate their supervisors into a higher career orbit, and when their fuel is spent, fall to the ground like burnt-out shells. In the streptomycin case, Waxman never suggested that Schatz was worthy of more attention than his researchers, although the moment of discovery belonged to Schatz. So, as a postscript, one of Waxman's former students, René Devaux, once written regarding scientific discoveries that the cruel law of scientific life, as their credit goes to the man who convinces the world, not the man or the woman to whom the idea first occurs. And Waxman's son, Byron, talked about the different lab etiquette in those days. In an interview, he said he felt sorry for Schatz because he had not fully appreciated that scientists who directed lab programs of any significance regularly appeared in all papers from the lab. Waxman gave his students first place, but they should not have been misled about where the ideas and organization of the program came from. And what was the verdict from Rutgers? Well, among the documents that have been unearthed by Erica Gorda in the archives at Rutgers, there is one which makes a case for Waxman's absolution. That's Schatz's notebook. Sorry, I forgot that. That's the experiment 11. Here's the absolution. This is a confidential internal memo from the Rutgers Public Relations Department in 1951, which reviews what appear to be the author of the memo, Rutgers' main public relations errors. 1. The original silence in regard to Schatz is all the build-up of Waxman on streptomycin. 2. The fact that the arrangement to pay Waxman was never disclosed. 3. The fact that the joint assignment of the patent to the Foundation was never disclosed. The impression again being given that Waxman owned the patent individually and had made the assignment, and that he personally had given $1 million towards the new Institute of Microbiology from the royalties. The author ended up feeling that Waxman had been a victim of Rutgers' public relations policy. He wanted no reward for streptomycin, but as the build-up went on, he got to love the public acclaim and the financial benefits, so that he forgot about Schatz and the name and acted badly when Schatz first asked in his letter to Waxman and then demanded in his lawsuit his share of the credit. So, was Waxman a great scientist? Yes, but he was also a human being. In that context, one of his students graduate students who had worked in his lab, Hubert Le Chevalier, had this to say. Waxman naturally considered he was responsible since it was the fruit of one of his research programs, and he had turned it from a lab curiosity into an anti-tubercular agent. Schatz naturally thought he was the co-discoverer, since he had done the basic lab work. His name was on the original paper, and several others published later. It was the subject of his PhD thesis. So of course I can't end being British without quoting Shakespeare. I think it's his birthday today. And that is from, you'll see it on the screen anyway. I'll read it. Good name in man or woman, my dear Lord, is the immediate jewel of their soul. Who steals my purse, steals trash, is something. Was mine, is his, it has been slave to thousands. But he that filches from me my good name, robs me of that which not enriches him, but makes me poor indeed. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Questions?
One. Oh, question. Yeah.
The memo that you showed from the official at Rutgers is basically claiming that Waxman, it wasn't his, what happened wasn't his fault. And do you know where this memo came from and why this person would be motivated to try to clear him?
I think they were obviously Rutgers at some point was embarrassed by the whole thing, and wanted to come up with something from the public relations department which could then be sent out. But actually this wasn't sent out. This was a confidential in-house memo, and I think it just, powers that be at Rutgers, perhaps it made them feel better or something. I don't know, but it was clearly there is no substance in this memo. It's just let's try and feel better about it.
had a question that kind of follows that up. Is it possible that Rutgers, looking at the amount of money that they were receiving from the patent, really didn't want to muddy the waters with who they were supporting in all of this, and who they had to share the revenues with?
Yeah, no, absolutely, of course. I mean, we're talking about lots of money here. $12 million or something in those days, a lot of money. You know, interestingly enough, Schatz, when he came here, did a little work on, because his uncle was a dentist, did a work on sort of tooth decay and the microbes that cause tooth decay. And they discovered something which hadn't been thought of before in this regard. And so they patented it, he and another researcher. And the president of the then National Agricultural College was furious. He said, wait a minute, you getting any money for those patents? We wanted it at the college, not you.
We could use that right now.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Waxman had been nominated so many times before, and Schatz's name had never been mentioned, but in 1952, as Peter said in his book, there was someone who nominated Waxman, Schatz, and Fuji. So that is really a lame excuse that they gave.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, but then they say, you know, all the evidence that was cited was not in the scientific paper, therefore it doesn't exist. That's the Bell rule. There's no way around that unless you change the rule.
Any more questions? Well, the bookstore should have books out front, and Peter, I understand that you're willing to do a book signing? I sure have my copy with me. So thank you so much. Let's thank our guest tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, David Wade, for making this possible, too. We greatly appreciate it. So just a reminder that tomorrow evening is another event that's coming up. It is the Eco Film Festival. And so Paris, is it Paris to Pittsburgh? No, it's Pittsburgh to Paris will be shown in here at 6 p.m. tomorrow evening. So if you get a chance, that's climate change presentation that you don't want to miss. Thank you so much.